Coming up on this Thursday edition of Newsline at noon, the United States and Cuba announced a historic deal that will see them normalize their diplomatic and economic ties after 50 frosty years. Korea's Transport Ministry will launch an internal probe after critics said its investigation into the so-called net rage incident was influenced by Korean Air. Plus, Sony Pictures cancels the theatrical release of its comedy film The Interview as U.S. intelligence officials conclude that North Korea was behind the hack attack on the studio's computer systems. These stories and more on Newsline at noon. It's noon Thursday, December 18th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Jin-Ju.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this lunchtime is to do with North Korea. And during his 3 years in absolute power, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has beefed up efforts for economic development centered on attracting foreign investors.
In the second of our three-part series, our Hwang Sang-hee takes a look at the changes made in the North Korean economy and what more needs to be done.
You see high-rise apartments, taxis, people using mobile phones, and children on rollerblades all on the streets of the North Korean capital, Pyongyang. Now, North Korea has recorded 3 straight years of economic growth, although it is in the 1% range, and experts attribute this to Kim Jong-un's relaxed regulations.
Small companies have been granted autonomy in management, although there are limits to self-sufficiency. Such marketization through 장마당 or black markets allows people to more easily buy materials.
But for a real economic liftoff, North Korea needs to attract foreign capital. For that, 10 more special economic zones were established this year, raising the total number to 24. North Korea claims over 300 foreign firms from countries like Australia and Singapore have invested more than $1.4 billion US, although these zones are known to have received just $400 million, with 80% of the money coming from China. North Korea's unilateral manner of doing business is keeping investors away, says a Dutch businessman who leads business-related missions to North Korea.
North Korea is also open for business and for foreign investment, but the foreigners, they are not going on a large scale into North Korea. And this is all politics, I'm afraid.
Experts say as long as Kim Jong-un clings on to the so-called Pyeongjin line, or dual development of nuclear arms and the economy, any effort for change will be futile.
North Korea may become more aggressive in introducing reform measures next year to form a Kim Jong-un-style economy. But there will be limits unless there is progress in dialogue on the nuclear issue, like the resumption of the six-party talks.
They also note the need for secure legal measures, as the world saw North Korea's commitment problem when it unilaterally closed down the inter-Korean Kaesong industrial complex for 5 months last year. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
And in a move that may have been triggered by harsh international criticism over its dire human rights situation, North Korea has reportedly replaced its deputy envoy to the United Nations. Citing a source at the UN, South Korea's NM News reports that Lee Dong-il was replaced a couple of weeks ago and is now back in the north. The report says Lee's successor is An Myung-hoon, who was a counselor at the North Korean mission in Geneva. The new envoy also served at the U.S. Department at the North Korean Foreign Ministry, and he was the top negotiator for the food aid talks with Washington back in 2012. Some speculate that the sudden personnel change comes as North Korea holds Lee responsible for not being able to stop a UN committee adopting a resolution calling on the UN Security Council to refer the North's human rights situation to the International Criminal Court.
Sony Pictures has dropped plans to release its controversial comedy movie The Interview for good, bending to a threat of potential violence at theatres if the movie is shown. This unprecedented development came as sources told news networks that the U.S. government is preparing to hang the recent Sony hack on North Korea. Shin Se-min reports.
Sony Pictures says its decision to scrap the release of The Interview was sealed after theater circuits in the U.S. said they wouldn't be showing the movie over concerns of recent threats. The studio said that while it was deeply disappointed and stood by the right to freedom of expression, it respected and shared the concerns. Prior to Sony's decision, Regal, Cinemark, and Carmike Cinemas dropped The Interview after hackers that identify as the Guardians of Peace threatened a 9/11-style attack on theaters that screened the film. Regal had said that it pulled the movie due to wavering support of the film by Sony, as well as the ambiguous nature of any real or perceived security threats. And just as Sony canceled the release, U.S. intelligence officials told various news networks that North Korea was centrally involved in last month's hacking attack that paralyzed Sony computer systems and leaked sensitive information. The U.S. says there's hard evidence members of North Korea's elite cybersecurity team, known as Bureau 121, were behind the attack. U.S. authorities have not completely discounted the possibility that it could be an insider with a grudge against Sony, but they say the far-reaching nature and threat of violence goes far beyond what a non-North Korean group would do. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, another day, another wrinkle in the so-called nut rage incident surrounding Korean Air. The Transportation Ministry is now facing allegations that it mishandled its probe into this very high-profile scandal. Our Ji Myung-gil has more.
The Transportation Ministry has come under fire for its handling of the inspection into the nut rage scandal. On Thursday, the ministry said it would conduct an internal inspection into their questioning of the senior steward who was forced to deboard the Seoul-bound flight early in the month. According to the steward, Park Chang-jin, some of the inspectors were former employees of Korean Air. He says Korean Air executives were also allowed to attend sessions where he was questioned. In an interview with a KBS television on Wednesday, Park said he was first informed by Korean Air that he would be questioned by the Transportation Ministry. He said he was provided instructions by the company on how to answer those questions. Although he refused to make false statements, he claims he was pressured by the airliner to do as he was told. Park also commented on a letter he received from former Vice President of Korean Air, Cho Hyun-ah. While it contained an apology, the senior steward said he felt it was not sincere. He said it was written on a piece of torn paper. With time to reflect on the incident, the Korean media and analysts say the scandal has exposed problems that are deeply rooted in Korea's family-dominated conglomerates. Family members at the firms are often more powerful than senior company executives and have reputations for dictating employee behavior. Cho Hyun-ah, the person that set all of this off, wrapped up a marathon 12-hour session at the prosecutor's office in Seoul early Thursday morning and left the building without saying a word. If she is found to have breached aviation safety laws, Korean Air faces a 3-week-long suspension of operations between New York and Seoul or potential fines of up to $2 million. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Let's now get a check on some of the global headlines we're following this Thursday lunchtime. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim standing by at the News Center.
Yes, Eunice, U.S. markets rallied on Wednesday. This after the Federal Reserve indicated that it's in no real rush at all to raise interest rates.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. Not until at least after April is the guidance that Fed Chair Janet Yellen offered. So it looks like the recent string of positive U.S. economic data won't quicken a decision to install that rate hike. Our Song Ji-sun has the details.
The Federal Reserve confirmed it plans to raise its key interest rate sometime next year. At the end of a 2-day monetary pulse meeting, the U.S. Central Bank said it will be patient when it comes to making a decision on when to increase the rate, a change in wording from keeping the rate for a considerable period. While the phrase hints more flexibility in its timing, Fed Chair Janet Yellen said the new guidance is consistent with its previous direction. The Fed said while the U.S. economy was expanding at a moderate rate, its pace of recovery is much faster than that in the Eurozone or Japan, and strong job creation has pushed unemployment down to a 6-year low of 5.6%. Yellen added officials would feel comfortable raising rates as long as other economic signals stay strong and inflation meet its goal of 2%, but it would not take place before the second quarter of next year.
At some point, it will become appropriate to begin reducing policy accommodation. But based on its current outlook, the committee judges that it can be patient in doing so. In particular, the committee considers it unlikely to begin the normalization process for at least the next couple of meetings.
Following the announcement, the dollar rallied broadly against major currencies on Wednesday, and U.S. stock markets were upbeat after 3 days of losses. Despite the sharp drop in oil prices and the collapse of the Russian ruble in recent months, the Fed statement did not touch on the recent global economic turmoil. Asked whether the Russian crisis could harm the U.S. economy, Yellen said the two countries were too loosely linked to expect any appreciable impact, but that they're keeping an eye on the issue. 송지선, Arirang News.
And a historical day for the Church of England. It has named Reverend Libby Lane as its first female bishop, marking an end to centuries of all-male church leadership. She will become the new Bishop of Stockport from her current role of priest and Dean of Women in Ministry in Chester. The appointment comes just a month after the General Synod adopted legislation to allow female religious leaders to become bishops. It comes 2 decades after women were allowed to become priests. A scary moment aboard an American Airlines flight caught up in a winter storm over the skies of northern Japan. The direct flight from Seoul to Texas had to make an emergency landing in Narita Tuesday after winds gusting at typhoon speeds violently rocked that plane. Loose items were sent flying, including cups and plates, as it was during mealtime. Passengers said the turbulence lasted for about 30 to 45 seconds. Meanwhile, on the ground, the blizzard wreaked havoc across Japan, dumping more than a meter of snow in some parts, canceling over 300 flights, shuttering schools and public transportation, and also killing at least 3 people. In Hokkaido, Japan's weather agency advised residents against venturing outdoors, saying winds exceeding 160 kilometers per hour would hamper visibility. The storm is expected to continue through Thursday evening.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
I'm Jin-ju with market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about 11.
Separated by 150 kilometers of water and 5 decades of bitter history, the United States and Cuba have begun to make up by restoring their diplomatic and economic ties. U.S. President Barack Obama says it marks a new chapter in U.S.-Cuba relations, moving beyond what he said was an outdated approach. For more on this historic deal that caught everyone off guard, Park Ji-won reports.
Wednesday's historic announcement that the United States and Cuba will normalize their long-severed relations was made possible after 18 months of secret talks between the two leaders.
Neither the American nor Cuban people are well served by a rigid policy that's rooted in events that took place before most of us were born. The United States will reestablish an embassy in Havana, and high-ranking officials will visit Cuba. Where we can advance shared interests, we will, on issues like health, migration, counterterrorism, drug trafficking, and disaster response.
This decision by President Obama deserves respect and recognition from our people. I would like to thank and recognize the support of the Vatican, and especially that of Pope Francis, in helping improve the relations between Cuba and the United States.
Bringing an end to more than 50 years of hostility, Cuba released U.S. aid worker Alan Gross on humanitarian grounds after he spent 5 years in a Cuban prison. In return, the U.S. will also release 3 Cuban intelligence agents. World leaders, particularly those from Latin American countries, hailed the news.
I think that the possibility of the end of the blockade gives Cuba the conditions to coexist with the international community, something that is extremely relevant for the Cuban people and for all of Latin America.
I want to point out that this is a key step, a historic step, a brave move that will allow for an important advance in the process of integration for all America.
Experts say the restoration of ties will benefit people in both countries.
It'll be easier for Americans to travel to Cuba. It'll be easier for Americans to send money to Cuba. And it will be much easier for Americans to support the emerging private sector, even with trade and capital infusions. All of that should help a rather weak Cuban economy.
Washington and Havana severed diplomatic relations in 1961 after former Cuban leader Fidel Castro seized power and became the first communist leader of the country in 1959. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
So with the U.S. and Cuba back on the path to diplomacy, eyes are now on whether the Obama administration will now turn its attention to North Korea. For more, here's our Lee Ji-yoon.
When U.S. President Barack Obama came to office in 2009, he promised a new era of diplomacy with the so-called 3 pariah states, Cuba, Iran, and North Korea. 6 years have passed since then, and President Obama has fulfilled his promise for Cuba, restoring ties after more than a half-century of hostility. Washington had also tried to move things forward with Iran over its disputed nuclear program. Just last year, President Obama spoke on the phone with Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. This was the first direct conversation between leaders of Washington and Tehran in more than 3 decades. So now that leaves North Korea. Considering that Cuba and North Korea share similar ideologies, experts say there's a possibility that President Obama might also change his diplomatic plans for the North. The top U.S. diplomat for East Asia, Daniel Russell, said Tuesday that the Obama administration has never been hesitant about holding direct talks with North Korea. He said Washington is waiting with open arms for talks with Pyongyang outside of the 6-party nuclear talks. However, others say it's too early to link North Korea with what's happened with Cuba.
Whether this is a new position that the Obama administration is taking in their foreign policy with respect to these kinds of countries is something that we could speculate over, but there's no reason to believe that there's a significant tectonic shift that is occurring here with respect to North Korea.
For the Obama administration, there's also the hurdle of North Korea's humanitarian issues and nuclear program. Experts say in order to see a real change, either the South Korean government will have to dramatically change its North Korea policy, or North Korea will have to change its hostile attitude. Lee Ji-yoon, Arirang News.
JIT Industries, the de facto holding company of Samsung Group, made a successful market debut earlier today. Stocks in the firm opened at more than $96 a share, double the offering price of $48. Now, under financial regulations, that's the highest JIT Industries could have got for an opening price. However, the share price has been fluctuating a great deal since its opening a few hours ago. Samsung Group Chairman Lee Gun-hee's family owns more than 50% of that company. Analysts say that as the IPO picked up speed after Lee was hospitalized following a heart attack, JIT Industries' market debut is expected to further accelerate the conglomerate's generational power transfer. And Korea's #1 mobile messenger operator Daum Kakao will launch a taxi-hailing app early next year. The company has signed a deal with the Seoul Taxi Association and public transportation payment services provider Korea's Smart Card for the launch of the service dubbed Kakao Taxi. The app will allow users to book a taxi that's nearest their desired pickup spot. There will be 2 separate versions of the same app, one for licensed drivers and the other for passengers. passengers. The move comes as global ride-sharing service Uber is facing strong resistance in Korea due to safety concerns and the threat it poses to the livelihoods of local taxi drivers.
South Korea enjoyed great military support from its allies and the United Nations during and after the Korean War. And in the period since, Korea has been trying to return the favour as much as it can by greatly expanding its peacekeeping operations around the globe. Our Kim Yeon-bin has this report.
This year marks the 50th anniversary since Korea's first overseas deployment. More than 320,000 Korean troops were dispatched to Vietnam, the second largest number behind the United States. 5,000 Korean soldiers were killed and over 12,000 were injured before the country pulled out in the spring of 1973. The after effects of the Vietnam War made Korea think twice before deploying another unit overseas. It wasn't until 20 years later that Korea became a member of the UN peacekeeping forces, increasing its involvement in international efforts to maintain peace and stability. So far, Korea has deployed over 360,000 troops in 17 countries, including Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan, and East Timor. There are currently some 1,400 Korean men and women in uniform deployed in 15 countries worldwide. Why is Korea so actively involved in peacekeeping operations?
Korea was built by the dedication and sacrifice of many different countries. Now we're a politically and economically respected country, and there are expectations both from inside and from abroad.
There are two types of PKOs that Korea takes part in. There are the UN peacekeeping forces and the multinational forces. Both are mandated by the UN, but the biggest difference between the two is that UN peacekeeping forces are fully sponsored by the UN, while the multinational forces are funded by each participating country.
PKOs are not just military operations. They're about military diplomacy, security, cultural and resource diplomacy. It also forges strong ties with the host country. It's also a give-and-take relationship. By taking part in PKOs, Korea can ask for help when it needs it.
Korea's peacekeeping troops have been welcomed in every place they have been dispatched to in the world. They proudly involve themselves in activities away from their peacekeeping activities, even promoting Korean culture to the local communities they are helping. Kim Yeon-bin, Arirang News.
Now, time is ticking. Christmas is exactly 1 week away now. And if you need some inspiration about what to get your partner or family members, then you want to listen carefully to this next story, because research conducted by Korea's Shinsegae department store has found that cosmetic products are top of the Christmas wish lists. But not just for women, but for men, in fact. Women apparently would rather a mink muffler. The gift items that used to be popular among women, we're talking about products like beauty products and perfumes, have now been replaced, apparently, with Bluetooth speakers and headphones. For men, fashion accessories were second on the list, behind cosmetics.
Good afternoon. Dress extra warmly. It's freezing outside with cold wave watches still in effect for many parts of the nation. And we had the coldest morning of the season, kicking off at -14 this morning here in Seoul. And right now the current temperature is about -7 degrees Celsius, but it feels like -12 because of the strong gusty winds. Though lots of sunshine will nudge the afternoon highs a bit higher than yesterday, but they will still below 0 for the upper regions, including in Seoul. So the afternoon high will only hike up to -1, while Daegu and Gwangju should peak at 1 and 2, and Busan will top out at 3 this afternoon. And as for the other regions, Jeju Island will be rising to 5, while Daejeon and Dokdo will be getting up to -1. Now the cold snap should ease tomorrow afternoon, with highs finally reaching above freezing, but snow is expected to fall tomorrow evening, which is likely to linger till Saturday morning. But it seems like starting next week, things will get much milder, so let's bear with these freezing conditions for a few more days. Now that's all for Korea, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of Newsline at Noon.
Certainly does. And please join us again at the same time on Friday. Until then, goodbye.